I had prepared for sterility. That was my first mistake. When a species advertises a world-class laboratory, certain assumptions become unavoidable. Clean geometry, regulated temperature, silence calibrated to the threshold of thought. Instruments aligned with religious precision. The absence of personality, the presence of purpose. Humanity, according to every compiled briefing, was chaotic by nature, but capable, emotion-driven, inefficient, yet strangely effective. Their greatest breakthroughs, I was told, came not from discipline, but from accidents they were clever enough to recognize. Still, even accidents require a controlled environment to be noticed. That environment was what I expected to see. Instead, I was standing in a hallway that smelled faintly of detergent, heat, and something fried earlier in the day. The building itself had no visible security, no scanning fields, no sterile barriers. The walls were narrow, close enough that my shoulders nearly brushed them. The lighting flickered slightly, as if unsure of its own authority. "This is it," she said, too casually. I paused. "This is the access corridor?" She looked at me for half a second longer than necessary, then smiled in a way humans often do when they know something you do not. "You could call it that." My translator flagged her tone as playful. I made a note to remain alert. She had introduced herself earlier as the lead researcher. Not one of the researchers. The researcher. That alone had impressed the council. A single human overseeing a project advanced enough to attract interstellar interest suggested either brilliance or recklessness. Both were worth observing. She carried no tablet, no visible tools, no identification marker. Her clothing was informal, not inappropriate, exactly. Just unbothered by the idea of observation. Fabric designed for comfort, not presentation. As if being evaluated by an alien intelligence was not worth dressing up for. Confidence, I assumed. Advanced cultures often abandon ceremony. "You said the lab was private," I said, careful to keep my tone neutral. "Is this facility concealed for security reasons?" She unlocked a door using a physical key.
A key.
Metal. Worn at the edges. Something like that. The door opened inward. I adjusted my posture instinctively, aligning my spine, regulating my breathing. One must enter a place of knowledge with respect. I was prepared to witness brilliance. I was prepared to be humbled. I was not prepared to be confused. The space beyond the door was small. Immediately, offensively small. The ceiling sat lower than optimal for comfort. The air was warm.
Lived in.
The smell intensified, not unpleasant, but undeniably human.
Fabric. Skin. Food. Life.
There was furniture. Not modular research stations. Not adaptive platforms. Furniture. Cushioned. Asymmetrical.
Soft.
My vision cataloged the room automatically, searching for hidden interfaces, retractable equipment, anything that would justify the phrase world-class lab. I found none. A couch that appeared to have lost an argument with gravity. A table bearing circular stains, each one a fossilized memory of liquid contact. Shelving filled not with data crystals but with books, paper books, some upright, some leaning, some stacked horizontally as if they had given up pretending to be organized. I began, then stopped. Human language contains many words for uncertainty. None of them felt sufficient. She stepped inside ahead of me and did not look back. That, too, felt intentional. "Before you ask," she said, removing her footwear and leaving it wherever it landed. "Yes, this is where I work." I crossed the threshold carefully, half expecting a sensor to activate, a holographic layer to dissolve, revealing the true facility beneath the illusion. Nothing happened. The floor did not hum. The walls did not shift. The door closed behind me with a final ordinary click. I was sealed inside what could only be described as an apartment. My neural implants ran diagnostics. No interference. No deception field. No environmental manipulation beyond what gravity and poor design had already achieved. "You said the lab was equipped to study complex systems," I said slowly. "Social cognition. Emotional regulation. Adaptive intelligence. She nodded, walking toward a counter cluttered with containers whose contents I could not identify. Still is. I see no instruments. She poured a dark liquid into a mug. Steam rose. The scent was sharp, stimulating. My heart rate increased by 3%. That's because you're looking for the wrong things. I watched her movements closely. Unstructured. Efficient without appearing so. Every action seemed improvised, yet confident, like a performance rehearsed so many times it no longer needed rehearsal. You're tense, she added, glancing at me. Relax. You're not on trial. That was when I realized my limbs were locked in a partial defensive posture. I lowered my arms. Observation requires readiness. Sure, she said, but you're not observing yet. She handed me the mug. I stared at it. For what purpose? To wake you up. My species does not. Drink it. Her tone was light, not commanding, expectant. I hesitated, then complied. The liquid was bitter, hot, unpleasant in a way that demanded attention. My neural pathways lit up as stimulants entered my system unannounced, uninvited, and alarmingly effective. My pupils dilated. She watched this with interest. Baseline established, she murmured. I froze. You are recording data? She smiled again. You are. Something in my chest tightened. Not fear, precisely. Awareness. This environment was not sterile. It was saturated. Every surface carried history. Every object implied use. Every imperfection suggested repetition rather than correction. I was surrounded not by control, but by tolerance. You expected clean lines, she said, leaning against the counter. Distance. Barriers. A place where nothing touches unless it's supposed to. I said nothing. She gestured vaguely around the room. This is closer. Closer to what? She tilted her head slightly. To us. My internal processors flagged a warning. Proximity without protocol increased unpredictability. Emotional variables spiked in uncontrolled settings. This was not how advanced research was conducted. And yet, my attention refused to disengage. The room pressed in on me, not physically but psychologically. There was no place to stand that felt neutral. No surface that did not imply use. I could not position myself as an observer without becoming part of the space. I became acutely aware of how I was standing, how I was dressed, how I must look formal, rigid, entirely out of place. She noticed. Don't worry, she said, eyes flicking over me with open curiosity. Everyone walks in like that their first time. Like what? Expecting something else. The words lingered. I had come to witness humanity at its most advanced, to observe their finest minds at work, to catalog their methods, their limitations, their potential. Instead, I found myself inside a room that made no effort to impress me. And for the first time since leaving my homeworld, I began to suspect that was the point. I recalibrated my expectations in real time. That is a skill my species prides itself on. We adapt quickly, revise hypotheses without sentiment, discard failed models without regret. Standing in her apartment, however, I discovered a flaw in that pride. My expectations refused to settle. She moved through the space with an ease that suggested ownership not just of the apartment, but of the moment. Cabinets opened and closed. Objects were relocated without ceremony. Nothing was optimized, yet nothing felt accidental either. Chaos, yes, but a familiar chaos, worn smooth by repetition. You're cataloging, she said, without looking at me. I am assessing, I replied. Same thing. Different ego. I noted that comment for later analysis. She gestured toward the couch.
Sit.
You're making the room nervous. I glanced around instinctively, searching for environmental feedback indicators. There were none. The room does not possess emotional capacity, I said. She raised an eyebrow. Give it time. I sat. The couch responded in a way no professional seating ever should. It shifted.
It dipped.
It accepted my weight without resistance or correction. My center of gravity adjusted twice before stabilizing. The sensation was intimate, too responsive, as if the furniture was aware of me. Interesting, I muttered. Careful, she said. That's how it starts. How it starts? Attachment. My translator flagged the word as non-critical. My instincts did not agree. She pulled a chair closer, not directly opposite me, but slightly off to the side. An angle that denied formality. An angle that suggested conversation rather than interrogation. It made it difficult to maintain a dominant posture without looking absurd. So, she said, crossing one leg over the other in a way that drew my attention against my will, what do you think of the labs so far? I chose my words carefully. It is unconventional. She smiled. That's the polite version. I am concerned about variable contamination. She laughed. A short sound. Sharp. Genuine. Oh, there's contamination everywhere, she said. That's the whole point. I leaned forward despite myself. Explain. Controlled environments give you controlled results, she said. Which is great if you want predictable outcomes. Not so great if you want to know what happens when things go wrong. Failure analysis can be simulated, I countered. Not like this. She gestured around the apartment again, more deliberately this time. The clutter, the overlapping smells, the faint hum of a device I could not identify, the distant noise of other humans existing beyond the walls. This, she continued, is where humans spend most of their lives. Not in labs, not in conference rooms. Here, tired, distracted, half-dressed, undercaffeinated, overstimulated. I felt a subtle shift in my internal state. Discomfort, perhaps. Or recognition. You're suggesting that this environment produces more accurate behavioral data, I said. I'm saying it produces honest data, she replied. There was a difference. She leaned back, hands braced behind her on the edge of the table. The posture was relaxed, but not careless. Everything about her suggested she knew exactly how this looked. Knew exactly how she looked. And you, she asked. How are you feeling? I am functioning within acceptable parameters. That wasn't the question. I hesitated. A pause long enough to be noticed. Long enough to feel exposed. I am alert, I said finally. She nodded. Good. That means it's working. What is? She smiled again, slower this time. The experiment. My processor surged. You stated I would be observing. And you are, she said. Just not from where you thought. The realization landed with uncomfortable clarity. There were no instruments because I was the instrument. No observation window because I was already inside the system being observed. You did not disclose this methodology, I said. You didn't ask, she replied lightly. Besides, if I had, you'd have armored yourself emotionally. Worn something less formal. My gaze dropped before I could stop it. My attire, selected to convey authority and composure, now felt rigid. Overdesigned. Performative. She noticed. Yeah, she said. That. I felt heat rise along my neck ridge, a physiological response I had not experienced since early training. This environment is destabilizing, I admitted. Exactly. That is not optimal. Depends what you're optimizing for. She stepped closer, invading my personal space without crossing into threat. The proximity was deliberate, measured. The scent of her, human, warm, real, overrode my environmental filters. How do you handle unpredictability? She asked. I mitigate it. She smiled. We swim in it. The difference was not philosophical. It was biological. She reached for a device on the table, a simple handheld communicator, and tapped a few times. No hologram appeared. No data stream. She set it down again, untouched. That was fake, I said. Yep. Why simulate data collection? To see if you'd relax when you thought the numbers were running. And you didn't. Her gaze flicked over me again, sharp and knowing. Still holding everything in. Muscles tight. Mind racing. Trying to stay professional. I opened my mouth to protest, then closed it. She straightened, stretching her arms above her head in a way that was entirely unnecessary and deeply distracting. You aliens always think advancement looks impressive, she said.
Clean.
Efficient. Serious. But that's just what advancement looks like when you're afraid of mess. I absorbed that in silence. This, she continued, sweeping a hand toward the apartment, is where we let the mess happen. Where ideas bump into emotions. Where distractions force shortcuts. Where mistakes don't get erased, they get reused. I looked at the stain table again. The uneven shelves. The couch that refused to maintain its shape. And you call this world-class, I said. She met my gaze, expressions suddenly sharp beneath the humor.
No, she said.
I call it honest. The silence that followed was not empty. It was charged. Expectant. I had come here to evaluate humanity's methods. To confirm whether their reputation was exaggerated. Instead, I found myself being evaluated, my tolerance for ambiguity, my response to intimacy disguised as informality, my ability to function without structure. I realized, with a mixture of unease and reluctant admiration, that I was failing every test. And she was enjoying it. By the time I understood the full scope of the experiment, it was too late to pretend neutrality. She had not altered her tone. That was the most unsettling part. No reveal. No dramatic pivot. Just a quiet continuation, as if this outcome had always been assumed. You're adapting, she said, glancing at me over the rim of her mug. Slowly. But you are. I object to that characterization, I replied. I am maintaining operational stability. She smiled. You're arguing semantics instead of methodology. That's progress. I straightened instinctively, then stopped myself halfway through the motion. The act of correcting my posture now felt performative rather than necessary. I let my shoulders drop the rest of the way, testing the sensation. It was easier. She noticed. See, she said. You don't need permission to exist comfortably here. Comfort. The word carried implications my species usually avoided. Comfort implied inefficiency, a lack of urgency, a willingness to tolerate suboptimal states. And yet my internal diagnostics showed reduced strain across multiple systems. You are deliberately manipulating my stress response, I said. Of course, she replied. That's how you get honest data. That approach would be considered unethical by our standards. She shrugged. Your standards assume the subject knows what they're feeling. I could not immediately refute that. She shifted positions again, sitting on the arm of the couch instead of the chair she dragged over earlier. The change was subtle but meaningful. Less distance. Less symmetry. More imbalance. It made tracking her harder. Tell me something, she said. What do you do when a system doesn't behave as expected? I isolate the fault, I answered. Remove extraneous variables. She nodded.
Right.
You clean the mess. Yes. And if the mess is the system? I hesitated. She leaned forward slightly. What if the noise isn't interference? What if it's the signal? My implants attempted to model the concept. The projections failed to converge. That would imply that you can't optimize humans the way you optimize machines, she finished. Trust me, we've tried. I looked around the apartment again, but this time my perception shifted. The clutter was not random. It was layered, accreted. Each object placed not by design, but by necessity, convenience, or neglect, and never fully removed. This environment did not erase history. It stacked it. You are surrounded by inefficiencies, I said.
She grinned.
And yet here I am. You claim this produces superior outcomes. I claim it produces useful ones. She reached for the communicator again, this time actually activating it. A low hum filled the air as a projection appeared, simple, flat, unadorned. No graphs. No complex visualizations. Just a timeline. This, she said, tapping the display, is when you walked in. The line spiked. And this, she continued, is when you sat down. Another spike. Smaller, but sustained. And this? She glanced at me. That was when you stopped correcting your posture. The spike leveled out into a steady curve. That's your cognitive load dropping, she said. You're thinking more clearly now than you were when you were trying to look impressive. The implication stung. You derive efficiency from informality, I said. No, she corrected. We derive resilience from it. She shut the display off again before I could analyze it further. That's all you get, she said. Too much data too soon makes you retreat. You are limiting my access intentionally. Yep. Why? Because you're used to control, she said. And control is your comfort blanket. Take it away and you either panic or you adapt. I felt a flicker of irritation. You are enjoying this. Also, yes. She stood and moved toward the counter again, rummaging through a drawer. When she turned back, she held an object I recognized from my briefings, a human snack. Processed, unbalanced, infamous for its chemical complexity.
She offered it to me.
For what purpose? Let's see how brave you are. I do not require sustenance at this time. She raised an eyebrow. You sure? Your stress hormones suggest otherwise. I took the snack. The taste was overwhelming.
Sweet. Salty.
Artificial. My sensory processors struggled to categorize it. Pleasure signals fired where caution should have been. She watched my reaction with open amusement.
See, she said.
You'd never approve that in a lab. No, I admitted. It violates several nutritional principles. And yet, I repeated, swallowing, it is defective. She laughed softly. That's humanity in a wrapper. The room felt different now. Not smaller, but more present. The walls no longer pressed in. The sounds blended into a background rhythm rather than an intrusion. I realized I had stopped cataloging every variable individually. I was experiencing the system as a whole. This experiment lacks clear boundaries, I said. That's the boundary, she replied. You don't know where it ends. I processed that in silence. You aliens come here expecting us to impress you, she continued. To prove we're advanced enough to sit at the big table. So you look for clean lines, big machines, serious faces. She gestured around again. But this is where we solve problems that don't fit on a whiteboard. Where we live with contradictions. Where we function while tired, annoyed, distracted, and emotionally compromised. You are describing chronic instability, I said. She smiled. We call it Tuesday. The humor landed before I could stop it. A short exhale escaped me, unplanned, uncontrolled. A laugh, stripped of dignity. She noticed immediately. Oh, she said. There it is. I straightened reflexively, then froze. She shook her head. Don't ruin it. I relaxed again. The realization settled in gradually, uncomfortable and undeniable. My species built environments to protect our minds from strain. Humans built minds capable of operating under constant strain. The apartment was not a failure of design. It was a stressor, a filter, a crucible. I had not been invited here to observe humanity at its best. I had been brought here to see how they functioned when nothing was optimized for them. And the most alarming conclusion of all was this. They functioned anyway. Better than expected. Better than I did. By the time I realized the experiment was ending, nothing in the room had changed, and that somehow was the conclusion. She did not announce it. Humans rarely do. They allow moments to expire naturally, like heat dissipating after contact. 1 minute we were speaking. The next, the conversation had thinned into something looser, less deliberate. I noticed because my mind began searching for direction again. That was when she had already won. You're quieter, she said, rinsing her mug and placing it upside down on a towel that had seen better decades. I am integrating, I replied. She nodded. That's the word you use when you don't want to say thinking. I considered correcting her. I chose not to. Silence settled between us. Not the sterile silence of a vacuum, but the lived-in kind. The kind padded with distant sounds, movement beyond the walls, a faint vibration through the floor, the low hum of something electrical continuing its thankless task without recognition. I realized I had stopped monitoring those sounds individually. They no longer demanded attention. You came here expecting a demonstration, she said.
Something you could quantify. Take home.
Compare. Yes. And instead, I looked around the apartment one last time. The couch still sagged. The table still bore its stains. The shelves remained uneven, defiant in their asymmetry. Nothing had improved. I encountered resistance, I said slowly, but not of the kind I anticipated. She leaned against the counter again, arms folded loosely. Go on. Your environment is inefficient, emotionally saturated, poorly optimized for focus. I paused. And yet it produces function under conditions my species actively avoids. She smiled, not triumphant, not smug, just satisfied. That's because we don't build spaces to protect our minds, she said. We build minds to survive our spaces. I absorbed that in silence. My people constructed environments to reduce friction, to eliminate unnecessary strain, to preserve cognitive resources for high-level tasks. It had worked. We were precise, advanced, stable. But stability came at a cost we rarely acknowledged. We could not function when control was removed. You are comfortable with failure, I said. Not exactly, she replied. We're comfortable with recovering. She stepped closer again, not invading this time, just closing the conversational distance. The move felt natural now. Expected. Tell me the truth, she said. When you walked in, what did you think? I hesitated. The answer surfaced immediately, uninvited. That I had been misled. I admitted. That this was not a serious operation. And now, that it is, I said. Just not serious in the way I understand seriousness. She laughed quietly.
Yeah.
That tracks. I straightened, preparing to deliver my assessment. Not aloud. My species preferred conclusions to remain internal until finalized. But the impulse itself revealed how deeply ingrained my habits were. I had spent the entire encounter attempting to categorize her, this place, this methodology. I failed. You never showed me the lab, I said. She raised an eyebrow. Sure I did. No, I insisted. You showed me your apartment. She met my gaze evenly. Exactly. The realization completed itself without resistance this time. No spike in stress. No internal alarms. The lab was not the room. It was her. Her confidence. Her willingness to operate without permission. Her ability to function amid disorder without collapsing into it. The apartment was merely the pressure chamber. And I had entered it unprepared. I will be expected to report, I said. I know. What should I tell them? She considered this for a moment, then shrugged. Tell them the truth. That humanity's most advanced research environments lack formal structure? She smiled. You can phrase it however you want. I recalculated, assembling the language that would be required to communicate this to minds accustomed to control. I will say, I began slowly, that human innovation emerges not from optimization but from exposure. That their environments deliberately blur boundaries between work and existence. That their problem-solving capacity increases under conditions we classify as suboptimal. She nodded. That'll scare them. Yes, I agreed. It should. She pushed herself off the counter and gestured toward the door. The signal was gentle, unspoken. The experiment was over. My presence was no longer required. As I moved toward the exit, I became aware, acutely, of how differently I carried myself. My posture was still upright, but not rigid. My movements deliberate without being defensive. My mind quieter. She noticed. You're leaving differently, she said. I paused, one hand on the door. I walked in expecting to evaluate your capabilities, I said. Instead, I was exposed to my own limitations. She smiled. Happens to a lot of people. I hesitated, then added, your species would be considered dangerously unprofessional by our standards.
Good, she said.
We'd hate to disappoint. The door opened. The hallway beyond looked exactly as it had before. Narrow, imperfect, alive with faint human presence. I stepped out, then turned back one last time. You never corrected my assumptions, I said. No, she replied. You needed to trip over them yourself.
The door closed.
As I made my way back toward my transport, my internal systems began compiling the report. Not a list of technologies. Not an assessment of infrastructure. A warning. Humanity does not require ideal conditions to function. They do not wait for order before acting. They adapt within chaos, derive insight from discomfort, and weaponize informality in ways that defy conventional metrics. They will invite you into their mess. And if you walk in like that, expecting superiority, expecting control, you will leave recalibrated. If you leave at all,